All right, wanted to welcome everyone for joining us today. We've got 62 people registered for the call, and I wanted to introduce, I guess, our remodeled or reimagined semi-regular communication device. We're going to call it the NAC Check-In Chat. It's going to be a series of Zoom calls for NAC members on a twice per month schedule for 2021. The next call is slated for March 10th and then March 24th after that. So we'll try to do it roughly 2 times a month or every other week. The free registration for the March 10th session will be out soon, possibly tomorrow. And also we'll have information about what's going to be covered in that session. As far as format, we're going to feature a special guest. And then we'd also like to offer a sponsorship opportunity for every edition starting with the March 10th edition. So if you are interested, drop me a line and I can explain that to you if you're interested in sponsoring one of these sessions. I also wanted to let you know that we're embarking on this structure. However, we're going to listen to you, and we will definitely make adjustments along the way. I did want to start out by making a few NAC announcements. We are currently taking registrations for an online ECM class that Larry's offering. Visit naconline.org for more details and a link. I do want to let you know, however, that registration does close on March 1st, so it is something you're going to want to jump on. I wanted to thank you for participating in the 2021 Expo survey. We got some excellent input. We've heard you loud and clear. I think we've got basically consensus on what you would like us to do with Expo. And we hope to share more developments shortly. There's some things happening right now. We're working this issue very hard, and we should be able to let you know what's going on with our NAC Expo. I do want to remind you that we are still processing dues renewals. You'll be receiving your dues renewals in the mail and email. So I'd just like to thank you for your prompt attention. NAC, like everybody else out there, we're going through some rough times, and anything you can do to help is very appreciated. And please reach out with any concerns, because if you are struggling to maybe make that dues payment, we want to hear from you and we can work with you on that. As always, visit naconline.org, all of our social media, either on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or just drop us a line. We always love to hear from our members. Now, just to introduce today's program, we're going to revisit the 2021 cycle of the Regional Seminar Series, Laboring with a Multi-Generational Workforce. And Larry's going to tell you a little bit more about that. But because of the way last year went, we introduced the seminar series as a 4-part podcast. It is on naconline.org. The instructor, of course, is Larry Etter, our NAC's Director of Education. We'd like to ask you, as Larry's going through his presentation, and he does have slides for us today, to stay in muted mode. And if you could use the chat function for questions, that would be great. And we certainly do want to take your questions. And so just please don't be shy. Before we get started, I want to give a big thank you to our partner, the University of Memphis Kemmons Wilson School of Hospitality and Resort Management. And we also did have and do have sponsors for the Regional Seminar Series. And they are Coca-Cola, Ferrara and Ferraro, pardon me, Gold Medal Products, the Hershey Company, Load King, Vistar, Royal Corporation, Rico's, and Pepsi. So with that, I will turn the program over to Larry. Larry, you can share your screen now if you'd like.
Okay. We have a couple of people. I think I admitted them. If I didn't, will you admit them?
I will certainly do that, yes.
Okay. How's that look? Does that look good?
We got your screen.
Great. Well, Chris, thank you, first of all, for putting this together. I think it's engaging to know that we as a community within this channel of business can get together and chat. I want to thank all the individuals who have joined us today for giving us an hour of their time just to talk about some of the things that we reviewed last year. It's interesting, 365 days ago, NAC was prepared to put on a regional seminar series that was going to address the multi-generational workforce and how that's kind of changing in our environment. We did not, I don't think we foresaw a pandemic, COVID-19 hitting us and affecting us the way that it has. I know that I was set to go to Los Angeles and visit Royal Paper Company the first week in March, and lo and behold, all of that was canceled, and we know the domino effect that occurred after that. Having said that, I reached out to the University of Memphis to see if we could do a video of that seminar. The seminar material covers about 4 hours, and it's kind of hard to sit and listen to anybody for 4 hours. So I elected to break it down into 4 different parts. Having done that, we presented that seminar to NAC, Dan Borski and Chris and Barbara, and kind of decided that it would be easier to break it down into 4 45-minute kind of pieces. And so it is, I think it's easier to watch it in that perspective. The problem does become if it's 4 different pieces and you watch it in longer spaces of time, maybe you forget what happened in podcast 1, or you're in podcast 4 and you don't remember what was discussed in podcast 2. The other piece that I found a little bit difficult, and I think you'll pick up on it if you watch the podcast, is that before you do any research or start to kind of look into what's happening, you need a baseline. And when I was doing the original introduction, it takes about 20 to 25 minutes to set that baseline or that foundation, discussing about the different categories and so forth and so on. And the whole time that I'm doing that commentary, I'm thinking everybody that's listening to this already knows this. And so I hope they don't, hang up on me while they're listening. So if you can bear with me during the first podcast, you'll see how it builds and builds and builds to a crescendo in the 4th podcast. And I think that's important to understand as you're looking or watching the podcast. I'm not going to give the seminar today, but I would like to kind of discuss some of the highlights so that if you entertain the idea, you could go back and review some of this and see what's going on. One of the things that sort of brought me to this category of work or discussion, I don't want to call it research because it wasn't a lot of research. The research was done, but it wasn't a complete research project, was the fact that in the media now, we hear so many different perspectives on what's going on. And we, for example, in the theater industry, know that we hear all the time about healthier foods and we need to be serving this and we need to be serving that. And yet, I think it boils down to the fact that we know what our core items are. And so having said that, I realize that people that research employees or the workforce have their own bias or prejudice. And so one of the keys that I wanted to do was to introduce the fact that I wanted to find people to tell us, employees in all the different categories, tell us exactly what they want from their employer. And how can that help us if we actually hear it from the horse's mouth, as opposed to, what the media is telling us and what their survey says. So that's kind of where this precipitated. This is how it got started. We did formulate a focus group of about 15 individuals. The demographics were very even. And so we had typically the same number of silent or traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, male and female genders were pretty 50-50. Ethnicity was very equal. And I hope I can show you some samples of what we did as we proceed. The focus at the start of this seminar was to kind of highlight the fact that human inventory right now is one of the most valuable things that a company can attain. And as I discuss, I say in this piece that our employees, our human inventory, if I can use that term, is the one aspect that really accrues in value and gets better, almost like red wine. The longer you hold a bottle of red wine, the more valuable it seems to become because it's a little more rare. The same thing with our employees. The longer we keep them, the less likely they are to make mistakes. And oh, by the way, we typically pay them more because they're more experienced and they're doing their job better than new hires. And so that inventory becomes more valuable to us. So the slide that you see right now really kind of recognizes that there are two types of companies out there: people that recognize the values of their workforce, and then there are some that typically don't, unfortunately. So the question really becomes, are you addressing the workforces and their new realities? And one of the facets is multitasking. We're starting to see now, we're asking individuals that can pop popcorn now to fry toasted raviolis. We're asking people that can work a cash register to make pizzas. And so multitasking right now in our industry has become really important. We're trying to manage our labor cost as much as we can. Therefore, we're asking people to do multiple tasks. We're also noticing a larger variation in the ages of individuals at work. And so that begs the question, how are they working together? And, I kind of discussed that more in podcast number 3 than the other podcasts. Anyway, communication is very, very important, and training. We found in our focus group that training is really, really important. And the individuals that we're talking and give their opinions can tell you for a fact what the problems are in training. And in as much as we all as leaders think that we're doing a great job training, our employees know the difference between great, mediocre, and poor training. And that kind of is visited. The 5 categories that we kind of consider were the silenced or traditionalist, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. It is interesting that millennials are listed as the Y generation. If you notice on the screen, there's a little pun there, but they're the ones that are always asking the questions, why? But it just turns out that the silent individuals are typically loyal, they're dedicated, they have values. They're probably the most affluent. And that would make sense because they had a lifetime to save money and to, put things away and be more secure. You'll see in the next slide that those are the same individuals that went through some tough times. And so therefore they learned to save and put things back. And they did without a lot as they were growing up because of the Great Depression and because of World War II. Baby boomers, on the other hand, are individuals that they have a high priority on work. And so they feel like they have to be out there doing things. But they're also the ones that have a tendency to distrust authority, because this was the first generation that was asking questions about Vietnam War and why are we there? And why are you telling me to do stuff without explaining to me why? And they didn't necessarily see everything the way we do. They're typically optimistic. They've overcome a lot of challenges. They believe a lot in self-gratification. In other words, everything is about me. If I do this for you, what are you going to give me in return? Those are baby boomers. Gen X, these are the children of the baby boomers. And what that really means is that the baby boomers did not want, and the grandparents did not want their kids to go through the same trauma that they went through growing up. Therefore, the Gen X are a little bit more spoiled. They've pretty much been given everything, or so they've been told. Hence, they seem to be lazy. But they also are the ones who really created the work-life balance. I remember when I first started in my career in hospitality, it was nothing to work 80 hours a week. I mean, it was almost expected of you. If you were on a salaried position, that's what you did. But this particular generation said, no, wait, time out. You're paying me for 40 hours and I want to do other things. I want to have entertainment in my life. I want to have a family life. I want to study. I want to have hobbies. I want a spiritual life. And so they created that balance. a work-life balance. Gen X is kind of they were the innovators of technology for the most part. And so they saw the birth of computers. They like challenges. And they were the first ones to understand job instability and how things began to change. I think back to my grandfather. He worked in the same job for 49 years or 50 years, something like that. As we move through Gen X, it's not unusual to see people work 4 or 5 years and then move. In the hospitality industry, for example, it's very common for people to work in restaurants or whatever, 2 or 3 years, and then they move on. Millennials, Gen Y, they're the ones that sort of grew up with global, worldwide communication. They're resilient. They've basically been the witnesses of extreme change. Things change faster than, for lack of better terms, speed of sound. In my CCM classes, I ask people about the speed of change, and I raise the question, how many people have a laptop? And nearly everyone in the class raises their hand. And then I say, how many of those laptops are now out of date? Then everybody raises their hand. This is the generation where every time a product came out, there was a new product, like iPhones, for example. If you bought iPhone 1, it wasn't 6 months and iPhone 2 was out, and then 3, and then what are we up to now, 9 or something? So this is the generation that grew up with those kind of attributes. It is interesting to point out that the silent generation represents only 3% of the workforce, whereas Generation Z represents about 32% of the workforce, and the millennials represent about the same amount. So between Gen Z and millennials, there are probably 15 billion employees worldwide in that age group. And I think that's why people are focusing so much on this multi-generational workforce, because this is a whole new generation of people. And these new people that older people are trying to manage, they're trying to understand what their interests are and how can they motivate them or stimulate them to do great work. How can they hold on to them? How can we reduce turnover rates? So it is interesting to see that you have about 60% of the workforce is either millennial or Gen Z. On the screen right now, you can see the different generations and how they're defined. I go into depth about that in the podcast. One of the things that happened during the podcast that I found interesting is that as I went through each generation, there was a tragedy, calamity, a specific social issue that happened in every one of these generations. And as I was preparing to do the presentation, I was asking myself, what is Gen Z going to go through? I mean, what war could there be? Is it a technological war? And lo and behold, weeks later, we see this pandemic, and for 365 days now, we've been scrambling to kind of keep our businesses alive. The number of people that are in unemployment right now, it's just, it's really tragic what's happened in the workforce as far as employment is concerned. So, I think it was really interesting for me to start to see what happens generation to generation to generation to generation. And in my mind, I knew that something was going to happen. I just didn't know it was going to be this drastic. In the presentation, this is a kind of some research that was done by Christine Comerford. She's a writer, and she kind of compared what the millennials look like versus Gen Z. And in as much as this chart is put up on the screen, and as I talk about it in the podcast, as much as it says it's different, there's so many similarities. So, for example, millennials, they don't work for a paycheck, supposedly. Now, remember, this is why I wanted to do this. We're being told by research analysts and professionals that study, they say they don't work for a paycheck, they want a purpose. I question that. And so that's why we did the focus group. And lo and behold, you're going to find out what the results are. Gen Z says money and job security are their top motivators. What this leads me to believe is they're probably more honest than the millennials, because I think you'll see that they're actually telling the truth. You're going to find out that all the generations have three particular characteristics that are important to them. And if you supply those three things, then I think you're going to have a solid workforce that can work together. As long as you provide people what they want, they're going to stay. Okay. So at one point, I did this, I uncovered this piece of research by Brandon Rigoni, and he wrote an article called "What Millennials Want from a New Job," and he did it for Gallup magazine. And what you see on the screen are 7 attributes that I chose to kind of pull out of his research. And then I kind of compared that to the 5 different categories of the workforce. Now, at the top of the screen, it's important to remember that the percentages that you see are listed as extremely important. So the group was asked, for example, the opportunity to learn. Is that extremely important? Is it somewhat important? Is it important, not so important, or completely unimportant? The percentages show the numbers of people that put extremely important. So opportunity to learn looks to me like it's inversely proportionate to your age. So for example, silence, the older they get, the less inclined they are to find opportunity to learn is important in the workforce. However, if you look at millennials and Gen Z, the younger the population is, the more important it is for them to learn. This really leads to another aspect, and that is, if we go down, we can see advancement. They almost correlate in percentages. Again, the silent generation doesn't necessarily feel like it's all that important to advance because they've already advanced. They're almost in retirement, or they are in retirement. And the reason they're working is to stay busy, or just to get some ancillary income because they're worried about whatever savings they have may not last as long as their lifetime. So, and you can see that it kind of gets, the percentage gets a little higher for baby boomers, and then Gen X is a little higher than boomers, and then millennials is a little higher, and then Gen Z is at 69%. The thing that struck me about this were that there were 3 categories that actually came out during the focus groups, and listening to the individuals in that group tell us what was important and how they answered their questions. I don't know about you guys, but for time and time again, I've been told that employees now want other things, and that money isn't all that important. Compensation isn't the number one thing that people want from their job. They want benefits. They want health care. They want a fun place to work. They want to be able to have creative contributions in the workplace. Well, guess what? One of the things that they want for sure is quality management. If you look across that line there, there's less than 2 or 3%, excuse me, there's probably 6% difference, but between 57 and 51%, all of them, all of the different generations want to know they have quality management. They want to have good leadership and people that can work towards advancement, okay? The other thing that kind of struck me was the compensation, and I put health benefits in there because health benefits can be a form of compensation. In other words, if you're paying the health benefits for your employees, that would be compensation. But it's really about money and how much are you paying me. Look at the numbers. The silent generation is at 61%. Gen Z is 61%. Boomers, 55%. Gen X, 47%. Millennials, 48%. I think that what I sensed is that you can say what you want about what encourages people to stay in the workplace or not change jobs. It's money. I'm telling you right now that if you're going to keep employees, you're going to have to find ways to get them compensated. And as I went through the focus group, I tried to look at various ways of compensation to see, for example, if you give people free meals, if you allow them gift cards or things like that. They want incentives, okay? They don't necessarily want something that they can provide on their own, such as food, movie tickets. Some of that was important to a few people, but you know, by and large, that wasn't what they wanted. What they want is income. as I was kind of going through all of these different generations, I also decided that there were different types of employees, and how do we work with those and integrate them so that they merge and help each other, or find a partnership in the company. And so I list in the podcast 5 different, I guess there's 5 different types of employees. You have full-time employees, balance sheet employees. In other words, these are people that would be fixed income kind of individual, salaried employees, shared. These would be part-time employees that work a little bit here, they work a little bit there, but they don't have the same loyalty, or they don't feel the same ownership as maybe full-time employees. You have temp employees, freelance employees. These are like graphic artists or IT people that you need, but you don't need them 100% of the time. So they're contracted to come and help when you need their services. And then volunteers. And volunteers are probably seen more on the sports side of the entertainment channel, where college football or stadiums, for example, they only have 7, 8, 9 events a year. It's hard for them to hire full-time people. And so therefore they use volunteers. They're incentive based. You pay them typically based on their production, 12% of whatever their sales are for the day or something like that. So the podcast does go into this a little bit in more detail, and kind of describes how you merge not only the different generations, but also the different types of workforces that we have. Now, I mentioned that I put together a focus group. And one of the things that can occur, and I did not want to occur, is to have it become too cumbersome and ask 50 questions and then try to boil that down into what people are actually thinking. So I tried to simulate 10, for lack of a better term, simple questions, like why do you need to work? What do you expect from working? How do you find satisfaction in your workplace? What makes you recommend your workplace to others? And so having done that, you can see that we gave them specific answers to circle. So question number 1, why do you need to work? The selections were need money, need benefits, need hobby, need security, was told to get a job. And I think you've heard me talk already, but I think 15 out of 15 people put A, need money. They didn't need benefits. They didn't need a hobby. It wasn't about security. They wanted money. Number 2, what do you expect from working? Compensation in dollars, increased experiences, formalized appreciation, profit sharing, or benefits? Having listened to this, I think you can guess what the answer is. I think 14 out of 15 people said compensation in dollars. And so during the podcast, this is kind of a teaser. You'll have to go to the podcast to see what the results are on these 10 questions. The next 5 are kind of like, do you get the tools you need from the workplace? What makes you angry at work? That was an interesting question. In other words, we're talking about people, most of the time when you have employees that quit, there's something that's bothering them. And so what makes you angry at work? And D was one of the number 1 answers, angry customers. They get tired of the interrelationship between trying to help people and not help people. So that sort of evaluates that. What really came to fruition through all of this was we have to answer these 3 questions about the employees that we're bringing in. The first one is they want to know if you know them. So do you know me? Do you know what I like? Do you know how I get to work? Do you know what grade I'm in school? Or do you know that I have a family back in Ohio? Or do you know me? Do you know what my issues are? In the process of putting together this study, I did videotape the focus group as we asked the questions. And in the upper left-hand corner of the screen right now, you can see a lady who happens to be upper baby boomer, not quite a silent traditionalist in age. But in her discussion right here at this particular time, she is giving a comment about how frustrated she is with her other employees. Now, she happens to be a kitchen manager at a movie theater. and she has employed an individual who is autistic. And that individual does everything she asks him to do. And he's a great employee and he's reliable, but he has some drawbacks. And she says, you know, it's incredible that the people that work in that entire environment don't understand or don't know him enough to know that he is autistic, okay, and they can support him, as opposed to they're, you know, making fun, okay, poking fun at him and some of his, you know, flawed behaviors that we typically don't call normal in the workplace. So that's kind of what that highlights. All of this is recorded, and we try to play some of these recordings for you. I can't do all the recordings today because it's, you know, a 45, 50-minute kind of podcast or sharing session today, as opposed to 4 hours. The second question that people are asking about is, do you care about me? In other words, are you compassionate and empathetic enough to understand what my challenges are? And then the last thing is, can you make me better? And you're going to see that that plays into the advancement piece, and how these kids chat about advancement. Can you make me better? After I kind of looked at this, it seemed to me that it was very similar to a high school athlete being recruited to college. What are those athletes asking the college coaches? Do you know me? Do you care about me? Can you make me better? Can you get me to the NFL? Can you get me to the NBA? These kids, or this group of people that are working for us now, they all want to know, do you know about me? Do you care about me? And can you improve my position? If in fact, and we heard this a number of times, if in fact you're paying me $8 an hour, can you pay me, how do I make $10 an hour? Because that's what I want to do. Some of these employees in the theater industry work for family-owned companies. They're privately held, and you know, once the president is the owner of the company and his son is the vice president of the company, how do I move up? You know, when the district manager's been there for 18 years plus, you know, I'm stuck in a position. I don't know how I'm going to grow, make more money, take on more responsibilities. The only way for me to do that is what millennials do. Millennials have a tendency to job hop. Millennials know that if they stay in their position for a period of 2 years, they're going to get a 3% raise each year. However, if they change jobs and go to work for a different company, they're most likely to get a 15 to 20% increase in salary. And so that becomes the challenge for us to maintain good labor, experienced people with 2 to 3 years worth of experience. They're increasing their value or their asset to the company, and yet somebody else will pay them more money. Why? Because we have in fact trained them and we've made them better at what they do, and now they have value to someone else who's willing to pay them more. And so that's the real challenge that we have. In this particular case, I wanted to see if I could play some of these. Let's see if this works right here. This is why individuals are talking about incentives. Yep, sorry. I'm going to go back. I don't know if they can hear.
As to upsell or to sell this cup. Look, the incentive is your paycheck. You get paid to do this. This is your job. But then I also, you know, I go back and forth with it because I want them to have fun and to incentivize them, because this generation does respond differently than our generation. And that's, I mean, I think I'm an old 36-year-old,
So that individual as a manager, she kind of gave away her age, but what she was really saying is that her employees are pretty good employees, but they know they have a set hourly rate. But if they can increase their compensation through incentives, they're more likely to give her a better performance. Let me see. I'm going to go back to that slide again because I think the other one is pretty good as well.
I personally like incentives because I'm goal oriented. I like to win. I like to win, and I like to win money. It's great. Because without that, you work every year, you're doing the same thing year after year. You're dealing with the same employee issues, building a schedule, doing this, dealing with customer complaints, and you get your 2% raise, and then that's it. There's paid based on effort or things like that. So to be incentivized with a contest or something that, hey, if you do your job super well, you can get more. Because that's the only way that I'm going to earn more money than my extra $17 a week.
Okay, as a manager, I thought.
So I think that was really important. She brought up some interesting aspects. She likes her job, you can tell. I think she's been with the company for 15 years. But she highlights the fact that she knows she's kind of in a stuck position. She's not going to grow. So the only way for her to make more money is through incentives. The next trait really is about training. And what we found out through this focus group, excuse me, not fake, it was a focus group, is that employees do in fact realize training. So let's listen. Hopefully you can hear this young lady talk.
This is what you need to do. That's it. And they're like, if you need any other questions, ask one of the people in concessions. So you have your supervisor or your assistant manager in concessions and they can help you. And especially at my location, it's very hard with communication between assistant manager and the supervisors, because the supervisors are the ones that are running the stand instead of the assistant manager. And they're all running around with their heads cut off like chickens. And, you know, these new people are standing there in the court like, well, what am I supposed to do? And I wasn't prepared for this. And then they're the ones getting talked to by management, because at that point, everyone's so upset by them not doing anything. But at the same time, they're not really sure what they're going to be doing. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that she brings out a couple of points here. One, I think if you listen carefully, again, they want to do a good job. Two, when you put in people who are untrained, it creates a conflict with the other employees. The other employees now all of a sudden feel like, I've done my job, but this person's getting in the way and we can't perform to our highest capabilities. And so now what we've done is, by lack of training, we've created kind of an issue among the ranks, for lack of better terms. This young lady right here tells a great story, and it's not necessarily about the theater industry, but she compares something that she's dealt with in her own life.
His training was just basically sitting in the truck and following the technician around and just watching him do stuff. And then once the training was over, it's like, here's your truck, here are your tools, and you're expected to be able to do everything. And he was just like, that's very reckless. And all their technicians are required to get 5 out of 5 from their customer surveys, and just so many things that they require from their employees. They don't. The training is just terrible, and they set their people up to fail. And he didn't last there that long, because he's just like, I'm not going to make it here. I ended up getting fired because I wasn't trained the right way. So I know there are companies that do have bad training practices.
How interesting was that? She used some interesting terms there. The first one was reckless. I found that interesting, that vocabulary was in other words, you're putting out people that aren't trained, and that's reckless behavior. I would agree. She also said you set people up to fail by not training them in advance. And so again, that particular person there was a Gen Z, and she was kind of discussing what her significant other has to go through when he was looking for a job. So the podcast does discuss a little bit more in depth about some of what these individuals are talking about, but it emphasizes how important training is. This individual here, let's see if we can play one of these. This gentleman right here spoke a number of times about advancement.
Yeah, I don't want to work nights. Yeah, so like that's totally understandable. I just feel like for the people that do want to stay, there really aren't options for them.
The model had always been, you needed concessions, you needed ushers, you hire 16-year-olds, and you went for 2 years, and your turnover rate was high, but kind of on purpose, and your payroll was really low because you're constantly hiring in minimum wage workers. But now you need people that are specialized to do bar. I have to hire someone that's 21. I can't pay a 21-year-old instead of 25. So I have to be able to slide my pay scale. I need kitchen people. I want to retrain new kitchen people every 2 years, and I can't have 16-year-olds running the kitchen. So, like the pay scale needs to slide, and we're supposed to run a certain payroll percentage, like just from my side, but that's got to slide because we do need people that are going to stay in these specialized positions.
So you have kind of
double-edged sword.
Yeah.
You're being asked to employ and maintain higher skilled employees.
And older
And
employees.
yet you're supposed to maintain a specific corporate standard of labor.
Right, and like,
Yeah.
you can't, I'm not gonna keep somebody that's 30, and give $10 an hour even, you know, and $10 an hour is pretty good for Malco, or, you know. our
And you don't think that's
company.
based on generation, you just think that's based on, your opinion is that it's based on pay scales.
Yeah, like, if
It
you-
just, it wouldn't matter if they were 16 or 22 or 32. What I think I hear you saying is the pay rate should equal the job responsibility. Is that what I hear?
That, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And like, I don't know if it's like for some locations, but I know for like my location, we call them force hires. But they're basically kids that are either family to like the higher ups or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like that. And it's kind of going back to what you said about how like you have like kids that like won't need to like hold a job because
They're usually the worst.
and exactly, and it's like, but then you have kids like me who were raised that you will be paying for your college, you will be paying for your
Yeah,
car,
exactly.
you're responsible for this. And yet you have the forced hires come in that won't do anything because, oh, well, I have mom and dad at home that, guess what, they're gonna pay for this, so I'm just here to earn money on the side and not really care if I do my job correctly or not, and that gets
So
very
what
frustrating.
percentage of the new hires that come in are what I'll call responsible working individuals, and then the others that have mom and dad in the background? What
I would
percentage?
say, we hire about 4 people every couple weeks or so. And honestly, it's maybe like 2 or 3 of them. And honestly, half of them are getting fired or they're just walking out and quitting.
At least 50%.
Yeah, and it's just, it's very frustrating.
Those are typically Gen Z people.
So you're hearing something that's kind of underwritten, and that is that I think that people care about the service standards and the job that they're doing, but they don't like turnover. For any case, they don't want to bring in a lot of new people all the time, and so advancement then becomes, or upward mobility becomes important to all of them. They all want to be able to even reward the employees they supervise with more responsibility so that they can keep those individuals and they're not rolling over. And of course, you heard the last few minutes, the one young lady was discussing, the trend now for people to work for a few weeks, get as much money as they need to pay their car note or buy that new dress or whatever they need, those physical needs that they're looking for, and then they quit because mom and dad are back there and they can help them. So that is a challenge. How you interview and select individuals is going to become very important, and that kind of comes up next. In this particular case, if you can see the screen in the middle picture, that conversation, that young lady gives another opinion on how important it is to work with your peers, and basically says that peer pressure is integrated, and that she wants to do as good a job as she possibly can to support the team and other people within the company. So she does. She wants money, but she also wants her peers to work for the same advancement, the same, what's the right word, means to help the company. Okay, so bringing it all together, really what we talk about then is how we can integrate. I think this is podcast number 3 towards the end. The silent generation with the boomers, with Gen X, with millennials, and Gen Z. In one of the comments, I do mention that the silent generation, they like being mentors and they like sharing their experiences to improve the new staff. One of the things that was revealed is that Gen Z likes mentors for sure, but they kind of prefer millennials to be their mentor. In other words, and the way I translated that was millennials probably made some of the mistakes Gen Z are making more recently than, say, the silent generation. So they kind of can relate to the speed of change. They can relate to some of those changes that are taking place quicker and faster. Give them what they want. They like communication. It's very clear that both Generation Z and Generation with millennials, they like ongoing conversations, whereas the silent generation baby boomers kind of grew up with an employment review every 6 months or maybe annually. Gen Z, Gen X, they want you in constant communication. Hey, how did I do today? How many large drink cups did I sell? What was our per capita today? Or those kinds of things. They're in constant. How did I do making popcorn today? Do you think I did better today than I did yesterday? So those are the kind of things that the younger generation wants. They want communication. They want shared information sessions. And they do, in fact, like mentoring. They like groups. They like senior leadership. And they also like incentives for new ideas. And then can you give them what they want? Can you make them better? So yes, they like training exercises. You'd be surprised how many times they like outside presenters. Even if they are only there for 30 minutes, they like hearing what other people can do to make them better. And so they also like empathy. They want people to feel some sensitivity to some of their issues. And again, they like leadership. And they kind of like the be one, lead one mentality. Some of this I'm going to go through very quickly, but it resembles the recruitment cycle that we have, that we teach in the CCM class. The first thing that you're going to want to do is attract or recruit the very best people. The personnel cycle that we teach at the CCM class is in red. And it's interesting that this particular slide that I came across is saying the same thing, okay, just in a different vernacular. They're different words. So attract, recruit, right? Similar. Acquire, to hire or interview the very best people, okay? Network or share. In other words, we want to have good communication among the staff. Number 4 is grow or train, okay? Educate. It's clear that all the generations like to be in the know of what's going on. Number 5 says manage or supervise, kind of the same thing. Reward, they like incentives, we've heard that, but you can also evaluate or compensate. And then in the CCM program, we have one more category, and that is termination. Termination is typically described as the opposite of hiring. I think we lose focus a lot of times when we have people leave the organization. Do we take enough time to find out why they left? Because a lot of times, if you can find out why they left, you can correct a problem maybe there. Okay, maybe it's compensation. Maybe there's one person in the company that's hard to work with. There are all kinds. I didn't like the hours. I need Fridays off. You don't understand that I'm in the marching band in the high school, and every Friday we have a football game, and you make me work every Friday night, so I can't do this. It doesn't mean they're a bad employee. It means there was a conflict in what they needed. So really what we're looking at is how we can create effective and sustainable human capital. That's what we're really looking to do, and that's what the podcast talks about. This slide right here, I don't want to go into it in length. I do in podcast 4, but it really talks about how human capital can promote a better strategic planning and drive execution. And so, it's understanding what the customers seek. What are they looking for? We're in the service industry, right? Is there data that's predictive that will tell us what we should be doing or where we should go? So for example, we've seen a lot of technology changes in tablet service, online ticketing, purchasing behaviors prior to getting to the venue. And so those are some of the things that we discussed in the last one. We're kind of getting towards the end of what the podcast is, and I really align it with something that I was told probably 35 years ago. I remember I went to a leadership development course, and they basically said that all great managers are 4F, and they described it as 1, fair. All employees want to be treated equally. And so, what does that mean? Well, it means exactly what it says. If you set the rules, You have to stand behind the rules and treat everybody the same. In other words, if I have to be to work on time, why does Johnny get to come in late? The second one is firm. So you want to establish the rules and stick by the rules. In other words, again, this relates to communication. If everybody knows what the rules are, it's easier to follow the rules. But if you say, okay, we want everybody to come to work tomorrow, come in around 10. Well, around 10 might mean 9:45 to some people, and it might be 10:45 to others. But really, you want to establish the rules and stick by those rules. Friendly, there's nothing wrong with being happy. One of the things that I think is important, and we talk about it in the CCM class, us as leaders, we're models, and people emulate or replicate what our behaviors are. And one of the descriptions I use is we have too many managers on Friday nights that do not like teenagers. They find them to be disruptive. They don't buy a lot. They loiter, and so forth and so on. And so when they see teenagers coming, managers are talking, whether out loud or under their breath, oh no, here comes some more of those teenagers. Well, how does that translate to all the other employees? Well, what it means is that all the other employees are going to be grumpy and grouchy on Friday nights because they don't like teenagers either. They don't like teenagers because the boss doesn't like the teenagers. So just remember that what you do, you are actually modeling for the employees or your peers and how they act. So friendly is good. And then physically fit. And this is one that I had a hard time learning early in my career, but people need good health. And that includes sleep. I'll never forget, we were trying to open the Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium, and the stadium wasn't complete. It wasn't ready to open, but there was a football game that week. And we were working 16, 18, 20 hours a day to try to get the building and the facility ready for this opening event. And, the owner of the company came to me and said, you need to go home and get to bed. I need you fresh. I don't need you to be tired. And so it taught me a lesson that you need some balance. I need to be physically fit. Okay. I need to get my sleep. I need to eat right. I need to get some exercise to do my job well, to have good mental capabilities. And so we do discuss that in the podcast, and it's in podcast number 4. We close with this statement. It's I saw this a while back. I think it's anonymous. I can't, it is not Larry Etter's words, but it says the future will not be a consequence among various conduits offered in the here and now, but by a condition that is fashioned, created first in the mind and by your will and then into action. The future is not a place we are going to, but it's something that we create. Our destination is not to be found, but invented. The actions of our choice as an inventor and the results that we aspire. And I think what it's really saying is we can, in fact, influence and make our own future. And we're not going to do it alone. We're going to do it with the other folks, the other people that are in kind of our work environment. And so I kind of end the podcast with that saying. And having said that, I hope I've outlined what the podcast is all about. Success in the employment channel really means lower turnover, higher morale. Employees will use or become references for your job place. You end up with fewer complaints from the patrons. Workflow efficiency is better. And so that's kind of the call to action here is how do we do that through the employees and the different generations? And hopefully I've given, at least some fodder for thought in the 4 different podcasts. Chris, do we have any questions?
No questions right now. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And the first is, and this might be an overarching question, and it might be a little self-serving because obviously we want folks to go and listen to all the excellent work done in the podcast. But with some of the positive things that have happened in the last few days, with some theaters opening up to limited capacity and so forth, do you see the principles discussed in the podcast series as maybe just a good reminder? Or would you go as far as to say more important than ever as the workforce is coming back in?
I think Yeah, it's probably more important than ever. You know, from my perspective, and I can only talk from my perspective, one of the challenges that we're going to see is that we've had so many people leave our workplace because of the shutting down of theaters, because of the closures, and then the reopening, and then the reclosures. There's so much instability in the number of hours that we're able to offer. I can't tell you the number of highly quality people that we have in Malco that we've lost, and I can't really blame them. I mean, they need a job. You know, one of our very best managers went into real estate and is selling houses now, and I'd love to have that individual back working for us, but yeah, I think that it's more important now than ever before to reestablish. This is the time to reestablish a great working environment.
Okay. One other question. Under your 4F screen, and by the way, the statement that's up now too, I think was really appropriate for the times we're in. You don't have to go back to it, but okay. under the first one, fair, and this just popped into my head because I've heard it my whole life. I've been told my whole life, I'll treat you fair, but I'm not going to treat you equal. That those are two different things. What's your viewpoint on that?
Well, fair implicates justice, okay? And so it's interesting because here it says fair, and then all employees want to be treated equally. And I think that's, let's talk about it from this standpoint. Let's talk about compensation, okay? I've worked for the company and we're going to see this happen very soon. Minimum wage, for example, is going to go up. Whether it goes up to $15 or it goes to $10, it's going up. So I've been working as a supervisor and I'm making $11 an hour. Minimum wage goes to 10. So everybody that steps in immediately gets $10 an hour. And yet I've worked for the company for 2.5 years and I'm only making 11. And what am I going to get a raise or not? Oh, so these people get to walk in and they're making almost the same thing I did. So the question is, what is fair? And then what is equal? And so in this particular case, I think there is a difference, but I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer the question. What's the difference between fair and what's equal? I think there's a difference. Yes, I agree with you, Chris. But I also think there is some similarity. So I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Well, that was a very fair answer. So thank you very much. We don't have any more questions, and we are about at an hour. Statement here, though, that might be appropriate to share. Maybe the fair, and of course it went off the screen on me, so I got to get it back. Maybe the fair equality statement takes us back to the empathy and flexibility in leadership, which I think is a good point.
Yeah. I think the problem here is we can put equality into different categories. That's the problem. I think fair is justice. Honest day's work for an honest day's pay is fair. But equality kind of transcends multiple categories. And so I'm gonna think about that for a while, Chris, and see if I come up with a better answer.
Okay.
Thanks for stumping me.
Well, I'll be looking forward to that answer. So appreciate it. But if there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my screen, if you don't mind, Larry.
Oh, please do.
And that gives us an opportunity to thank our sponsors once again for really throwing their whole weight behind a project and then sticking with it in a year that wasn't exactly ideal. But just some reminders before we leave you today. We want you to join us on March 10th. Information and the link to register for that will be coming out shortly within the next day or two. So, and we are going to ask that you each register for each session individually so that we know exactly who's on these calls. Another reminder, that online ECM class, we've got a handful of registrants already, but that does close on March 1st. So take a look at that. If you're a CCM or an ACE, and you have the ACE designation, we do have that ECM class available to you. Another reminder, look at naconline.org to listen to the podcasts that Larry referred to. The series of podcasts are broken into 4 parts. They all run about 30 to 35 minutes long, and one does build on the other. And then also, a recording of this session will be ready shortly, and we will also post that on the same screen that you can find the podcasts on naconline.org, or you can also find those podcasts on many of the places where you get your podcasts. With that being said, I'd like to again thank our guest, Larry Etter. Larry, appreciate you being on, and hope that our audience will continue to register, and we'll build this audience in our new communication vehicle, which is the NAC Check-In Chat. With that being said, you've been watching the Check-In Chat here by the National Association of Concessionaires, where food meets fun. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Chris. Bye, everybody.